Well, Zambia is heading towards a high-stakes election on August 13, 2026, which will be a massive test for President Hakainde Hichilema and the UPND. Now, while the government is getting credit for passing the Access to Information Act and cleaning up the voter registration process with new online tools, many Zambians are feeling the weight of a tough economy, rising food prices, and massive debt. Now, according to the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, the big question is whether the government can deliver on its promises of rule of law while people are struggling to make ends meet. Now, because things are so tense, fake news is expected to be a major problem. To get ahead of it, groups like the UNDP and local civil society have teamed up to launch an information integrity coalition specifically to catch lies before they spread. So despite some rumors you might hear online about the election being moved, the Electoral Commission of Zambia, that's the ECZ, has been very, very clear that the date is set in stone. The 2026 vote is not just about picking a leader, it is about whether Zambians feel their lives have actually improved since the last big shift in power. Now, joining us to speak more on this, we have Aaron Gambi, a political analyst in Texas, USA. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us at this time.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, Aaron, the government is projecting a 6.4% GDP growth rate for 2026, yet nearly 60% of the population still live below the poverty line. So how do you explain to a voter in a rural district that the macroeconomy is fixed when the price of meal remains a daily crisis?
Yeah, that's actually been the challenge for this administration. You will recognize that their economics looks very good on paper. Unfortunately, it does not trickle down to, the effects do not trickle down to the masses or the people on the ground. The issues of bread and butter still remains the major decisive issue going into this election. But also you look at what the government claims. The government has claimed that they have restructured the debt, which in fact they inherited an enormous debt from the previous administration. They've restructured that debt. They have set the economy on its path to prosperity. And just like you pointed out, the projection for GDP growth this year is at 6.4. In fact, at the end of 2025, the projection was at 6%. But yes, in fact, the figures that you're quoting are very conservative. About 60% of Zambians still live in poverty. In the last 4 years and 5 years now, the current administration claimed that they've done so much in terms of improving the economy and in terms of talking about exchange rate and inflation and things like that. But these factors do not translate to how the people are feeling on the ground.
So now Zambia is also praised as the first to successfully restructure debt under the G20 common framework. Yet we're seeing external debt still sitting at $15.78 billion in mid-2025. So would you say that this is a genuine recovery, or are we simply pushing a massive financial time bomb into the next presidential term?
Well, when it comes to debt restructuring, you know, these things are very technical and they take time. If you're dealing with the IMF and the World Bank and the G20 framework of debt restructuring, you don't expect to see results overnight. What you expect to see is over time, probably in the next 5-10 years, then you begin to see the effects of the process. But nonetheless, what the people are concerned about, or the people want to see, are tangible results on the ground. You can talk about debt restructuring all you want. You can talk about single digits inflation. You can talk about exchange rate. But if people are not able to afford 3 meals a day, as they would want to, it becomes very problematic for the ruling party. Yes, Zambia is the first one to claim that they have successfully restructured the debt, but yet we have not seen the consequences of that up to now. So that is yet to be seen in the next few years, how the effects will look like. But yet, as of now, it looks very gloomy in terms of how to sell that message to the people in the rural areas, like you said.
So let's quickly touch on the 2026 budget, which relies heavily, on scaling copper production to over 1 million tons annually. looking at the volatility of global prices and energy shortages, is the government's entire re-election strategy built on a mining miracle that may not materialize?
Actually, they're close to that miracle that they're expecting if you look at the production of copper right now and also the copper prices on the international market. I think 1 metric ton is fetching about $13,000, and that's the record high in the last few years. But ask yourself, is the Zambian government taking advantage of what is happening now in the mining industry? And that is debatable, because if you look at the administration of, for example, Levi Mwanawasa during the 2008, 2001 to 2008 period, what Levi Mwanawasa and his administration did was that when they began to see the surge in copper prices, so they began to see the production was going up, they imposed what they called a windfall tax on mining companies. Mind you, these mining companies are multilateral corporations. They're not owned by Zambians or the Zambian government. Therefore, most of the profits that they make are profits that are paid out as dividends to the owners, who do not even live in Zambia or reside in Zambia. Therefore, the Levi Mwanawasa administration imposed a windfall tax, which was extra tax on the super profits that the mines were making. That was a bit unpopular, but it was the right thing to do, because that changed the shift in the economy of Zambia at the time. This government is not doing that. In fact, this government is accused of giving tax holidays or not taxing enough these multilateral corporations so that they can gain revenue from these gains that we're seeing in the mining sector, the production going up, and the price of copper on the international market being almost 13,000 per metric ton. So the government is not doing sufficient, not doing enough. And even though they want to increase their production by 1 million metric ton per year, the question is how much will they actualize from that as revenue? They don't seem to have that will to actually stand up for the Zambian people and get the rightful taxes from these mining companies.
Okay. Now, speaking of what the government did or didn't do, remember in late 2025, the constitutional bill, that's Constitutional Amendment Bill 7, passed with 135 votes and almost no opposition in the House. So critics call this a rushed job. Does the introduction of a mixed member proportional representation actually empower women and youth, or would you say it is a tactical move to dilute the power of opposition strongholds? Because the Speaker of the National Assembly was also seen celebrating the passage of this Bill 7. So in a democracy where the legislature is meant to, check the executive, has the perception of an independent parliament been permanently damaged ahead of the polls?
That's a very good question. Yes, the Constitutional Bill 7 that was amended, and the process that led up to that was very disturbing. In fact, a lot of us criticized the process. Number one, you're right, it was a rushed process. Number two, even the Constitutional Court, when this was petitioned, actually ruled that the process itself, the genesis of how this bill came about, was not constitutional, was not in the spirit of the Constitution. Therefore, a lot of us came to the fora and explained why we had concerns about this. There were about 13 clauses in that bill that were going to be amended according to how the government wanted to do it. And yes, speaking of mixed member proportional representation, which is not the only controversial thing, the other thing is that that bill, which actually now passed into law, it's Act 13 of 2025, that law right now actually has increased the number of seats in Parliament from 156 constituencies to 226. That's adding about 70 more seats. Now, for them to do that, the Electoral Commission of Zambia did a report called a delimitation report. And this report shows us which constituencies, which areas would the Zambian government have to split or divide to come up with extra 70 seats to add to what we already have. And on top of those 70 seats, the same law actually empowers the government to actually figure out a proportional representation where 20 seats will permanently be given to women, 12 seats will be given to youth, and then about 3 to disabled people. Now, the way that they'll do that, the metrics that are used is according to the explanation, according to what the law says, is that this will be based on the performance of political parties in an election. The problem with that is that a lot of critics see this as, number one, increasing the number of seats and also bringing up this issue of proportional representation as a way of the ruling party getting 2/3 majority after August 2026 elections, so that in the next 5 years, they can change any laws that they want. And yes, you're right, that dilutes the power that the legislature should have on the executive. So this is the problem we're sitting with. This is the issue that most critics are speaking to. But when the question of, does the government mean well, was this done in good faith in terms of bringing 20 permanent seats for women and 12 for youth?
For youth,
The argument is that this government, since its inception in August of 2021, by the Constitution was empowered to actually nominate 8 to 10 members of parliament by the president himself. And if you look at those 8 nominated members of parliament, none of them except one is woman. And so it tells, and none of them is a youth. All of them are male who are probably in their 60s and 70s. And so it tells you, does this justify the argument that the ruling party makes that they're really interested in women representation? Or is this just one way that they were trying to sell this bill to the women and the youth so that they can support it before it passed into law? So I lean towards the latter. I think this was just a tactic and an argument that the government was making so that it can pass this law and be able to go into the elections and hoping that they can bloat parliament and have 2/3 majority right after the elections.
Well, sadly, we actually would be wrapping up soon, and you talked about, arguments. I wanted to find out about the resignation versus withdrawal debate in the Constitutional Court, which has created a loophole where an election can be cancelled and restarted if a candidate pulls out. So would you say, what is your thoughts on that? And would you say this is legal, legitimate legal provision, or is it a sabotage button, especially for political parties to use when they see a loss coming?
I mean, there are a lot of things that can be loopholes in the Constitution and a lot of things that can be manipulated, especially by a sitting government or the ruling party. The specific clause that you've spoken to are one of the things that the government argued that they wanted to fix going into the 2026 elections. They wanted to say that if a member of parliament resigns, or if a councillor, or if someone resigns from their seat, they wanted to effect a clause whereby the ruling party, actually the party that that person belongs to, can just replace that member of parliament rather than going to a by-election. Now, one of the things that the Zambian people stood up to against the government was that they wanted to also air their views, not that this bill was going to just be imposed on them and then they sign off on it. So when this was presented to the Zambian people through a technical committee that did the work for almost a month, the kind of work that should have been done for 12 months or even plus, when the technical committee did that, actually the Zambian people said, no, what we want is to still have by-election so that the people that we elect are accountable to us, the electorate. Not that the people that are sent to parliament are sent by a political party or by somebody on behalf of the constituency. So that clause actually, fortunately enough, the by-election issue still stands. That clause was kicked out of the bill and it does not appear anywhere in the law in Act 18 of 2025.
All right.